everybody. Welcome to our third workshop of the spring semester 2020. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to get started on this workshop. I think you all are going to enjoy our guest speaker this evening. I think gonna learn a lot. Our topic of our workshop this evening is on the topic of how do I prepare for a professional interview? So you're going into the interview, maybe you've gone to career fairs, maybe your mentor has hooked you up and connected you with someone at their company. You know, maybe you've gotten some referrals somewhere else. Doesn't really matter. You are about to step into the interview. Maybe you've already had interviews before. This workshop is about how to think about interviews differently. We are bringing in guest speakers who are experts on this topic from around the world to give you insight and wisdom on how to make the most out of the professional interview. So this workshop is going to be about 45 minutes long with, and I encourage you to ask questions throughout the workshop. I'm going to ask you 3 questions during the workshop, which I'll have you answer. That's how you get credit for being here. You're now midway through the program so far. You should have already had your first conversation with your mentor. Hopefully you've already started setting up your second conversation with your mentor. If you have not, or you're struggling to get in touch with your mentor, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We need to take care of you so then you can get connected and make the most out of this program. So really, this program is all about how can you prepare for the first professional interview. Really, what you're selling your interviewer on is your ability, essentially your future potential opportunity. Essentially, you are selling them on your potential, because at the end of the day, people are not expecting you to come in and be the expert on XYZ topic. They are expecting you to be a willing learner and someone that's eager to gain knowledge and to be a better professional. If you can convey that, you will get the opportunity. But it will be competitive, especially in highly competitive industries. And I know that anybody that's in this program is more likely than not going into a career that's competitive. I mean, you would not have gotten a mentor had you not wanted to take your level, take your career, take your life to the next level. So with that said, I want to encourage you to keep your head up, keep applying, put yourself out there for more opportunities, and leverage the insight and knowledge that you're getting in these workshops to make yourself and to help you better prepare yourself for the interview. Now, before we get started into our main program, I want to ask you a quick question, and that question is, when it comes to the interview, how do you want people to feel about you? In other words, what feeling are you trying to convey about yourself when you are in an interview? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that, because I think if we are more intentional about how we want other people to feel about us in the interview, our likelihood of actually having that happen increases substantially. I mean, I've talked about in past workshops, strategy, story, state, which I will talk about in a moment, but this is a really big part of the story part. Like, what is the story that you're telling yourself? Now, I think sometimes we can interpret that as psyching ourselves up, getting ourselves confident, getting ourselves pumped for why we're going to be successful. And I think that's great. But I think if we could take it to another level, that being intentional about how we want other people to perceive us. So if we want them to perceive us as confident, or if we want them to perceive us as knowledgeable, or if we want them to perceive us as eager to learn and having potential, it could be a variety of things. But what I really want you to do is I really want you to identify feelings that you want other people to feel about you when you enter their world. Because you can be intentional about that. Your likelihood of having them actually feel that is much greater. But if you don't set the intention, you have no idea how they're going to feel about you. You've got really no control over it. But if you intentionally think to yourself, I want people to think of me as confident. Okay, what am I going to do that's going to convey and convey confidence? Really, it's all about whatever that feeling you want to convey. Make sure that you are taking actions and being intentional about ensuring that other people view you that way, and that you come in trying to actively think about actions that you can take that will help other people perceive you in that light. So let's start under the next part of our workshop. Now, I've talked about this in the past before, and I've talked about this in previous workshops, but one of the big things that I always love to stress is the 3 keys to success in the program. There are 3 of them. That is your strategy, that is your story, that is your state. I bring it up every single time because it is that important. And the reason why it's important is because if we are not honing our strategy, honing our story, honing our state, we are not setting ourselves up for successful. If we let someone else drive our roadmap for us, we could end up in a location that we do not want to be. But if we are intentional about our story, if we're intentional about our strategy, if we are intentional about our state, we are much more likely to get to where we would like to go. It's kind of like the law of attraction. When we put it out there, and we put it out to more people, and we're more intentional about what we want to accomplish, and we're more intentional about how we are going to convey our bodies and ourselves to other people, the likelihood that it comes back to us is much greater. So I want to talk about state. State is the most important thing. Like physically, where are you at in your life, in your world? What is going on? I don't care how stressed you are. I don't care how mad you are. I don't care how dejected you are. I don't care of anything negative going on in your world. If you can get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, especially for the interview, you will be successful. I'm a big proponent of power poses. I'm a big proponent of screaming at the top of your lungs and dancing out. In fact, I'd like to do that with you right now. So for the next 30 seconds, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to stand up. I'd like you to shimmy it out. I'd like you to shake it out. I'd like you to scream at the top of your lungs. Just scream at the top of your lungs at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out. Let it loose. Let it go, because you've got nothing to lose. I don't care if it's a popularity contest. I don't care if you're in a library. I don't care if you're in a house. What do you have to lose? This is not a coolness effort here. It's about making an impact and preparing yourself physically for being successful. What is the price of success? Getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. Maybe looking a little weird to some of your colleagues, coworkers, or peers, but what is that cost to you in the long run? Nothing. They're going to say, you know, hey, what were you doing? Why were you dancing? Why were you screaming at the top of your lungs? You say, hey, I'm getting myself in a state conducive for being successful. Maybe they've never heard about it before. Maybe they've never learned. You can educate them on this. So don't worry about how other people are perceiving you when you are going to get yourself into a state that's going to level up your game, especially when it comes to the interview. Now, you may not want to do this in the office of a business that you are about to interview in, but you could certainly do it in the bathroom, in a bathroom stall. Get yourself into a 2-minute power pose. Stand up like Superman or Superwoman, or put your arms out like as if you're a star. There's a lot of things that you can do to get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, but you should be doing something, because if you're not, you are letting the way that other people perceive you essentially come up to chance. And you don't want to chance it, especially for the opportunity of a lifetime. And you have no idea which opportunity is the opportunity of a lifetime. It may not be this job. It could be the next one. If you make a positive impression in an interview and you may not land that job, that interviewer could have really loved how you interviewed, and that person may not be at that company for forever, or they might be, and they might come up with a new job. They might reach out to you personally to have you come and interview. It's all about the relationship. It's all about how they perceive you. It's all about that impression you leave. Your state is critical. Now, what is the story you tell yourself for why you are going to be successful? This is something we kind of did earlier when I asked you, how do you want other people to feel about you in the interview? This is a great exercise to prepare yourself for a professional interview. If you are intentional about how you want other people to feel about you, you are going to put yourself into a position to succeed, because then you're much more likely to manifest that outcome. Literally, law of attraction, putting it out there. I want other people to feel XYZ about me. Confident, smart, intelligent, well prepared. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's a weakness that you have, but you like to have them perceive it as a strength. Maybe it's a strength that you have that you'd really like to amplify even as a greater strength. Doesn't matter, but set an intention of something. Because if you don't set an intention of something, it could be wild in terms of what they actually perceive of you. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you're going to do to make the most out of this interview? Are you going to come prepared with questions? Are you going to come prepared with doing background research on the company? Are you going to make an intentional, focused effort on taking notes during the conversation, so then you're asking poignant, direct questions to the interviewer that are relevant about his or her life? Are you going to do the things that you need to do to be the most successful in an interview, or are you not? So the strategies you're going to learn from our guest speaker later on in this workshop, I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest speaker has to say. But before we jump into our guest speaker, I want to talk about one final thing, and that is getting yourself into a routine that can help you prepare for an interview. One of the things that I like to do, have an accountability partner. This could be it could be anybody. But what you want to do with your accountability is you want to share with your accountability partner 3 things that you learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to get closer to that internship or job. What this does, and you might think this sounds silly, you might think this sounds crazy, it could be another student in the program, it could be a friend of yours, does not matter. But what we've learned, what we've observed is that students who land jobs and internships through this program are substantially more likely to actually land that job and internship if they told other people about their experience. One of the questions we ask at the end of the question is, on average, how many other people did you tell about your experience in the program? What we ended up learning was that when a student told 20 or more people about their experience in Ambition in Motion, their likelihood of also landing their job and internship was substantially higher than students who didn't. There's a direct correlation to you telling more people about your experience and what you're learning in this program. to actually landing the outcomes you like than not. So I want to challenge you to identify an accountability partner. Share with them 3 things that you've learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to help you get closer to landing that job or internship. Now, the other big thing that I want to bring up with you is a referral program. So we are now starting to open up the applications and the signups for next fall. One, I'd love for you to be in part of the program again. You can get a new mentor, you're going to get new content, you're going to learn from new speakers. But more importantly, I want you to encourage other students to get involved as well. We have a referral program for you, so then you are discounted to get in the program next semester. Essentially, anytime that anybody applies, we ask them, how'd you hear about us? If they write in your name, you get credit. If you don't mind being an ambassador for this program and helping encourage other students to get involved and take advantage of this, I would greatly appreciate it, because it would help us make a bigger impact on more people, which is really what our goal is. So let's jump into our workshop. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. I'm so excited to transition into this next part of the workshop. Remember to answer the 3 questions that we asked during the workshop. That's how you get credit for being here within 24 hours of the workshop going live. If you've got any questions during the workshop, please feel free to post them in the comment section. We are going to work on answering them. If you got any questions, any concerns, any issues with anything at all, please email support@envision-in-motion.com. We will answer those questions, concerns, and issues. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. So I'm excited to begin the next part of our workshop this evening. And by the way, our workshop topic is how to prepare for an interview. I've got an awesome guest this evening, Mac Prichard. Mac is the founder and publisher of Mack's List, a job board and career hub for the Pacific Northwest, with a mission to create more human hiring processes to improve the workforce for all. Needless to say, Mac has a ton of experience on this topic of preparing for the interview. Mac built 2 small businesses on the strength of his network, and has taught thousands of people how to grow their careers through relationships with others, which is completely relevant to what we're doing, since every student who's in this program has a mentor. It's all about building those relationships and starting that. So that's completely relevant and awesome that you've done that. And Mac is also the author of Land Your Dream Job Anywhere and host of the career podcast, Find Your Dream Job. Mac, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Garrett.
So, Mac, I think to get started, I know I kind of did a brief overview of you, but would you mind just maybe sharing a little bit more about yourself and a little bit of how you got to where you're at today in a brief version?
Well, as you mentioned, I run 2 small businesses here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in Portland, Oregon. My career has been in politics, government, and nonprofits, and I've been doing this for some decades now, Garrett. I knew when I got out of college, I wanted to do 3 things. I wanted to work in politics, I wanted to get paid to write for a living, and I wanted to work on human rights issues. And I've, during the course of my career, been able to do all 3. And along the way, I learned how valuable it was to build relationships and both serve and grow a network. And that is a big part of what drives what we do at Mack's List. And it's also an important part of what we do at my public relations company, and it has been a big part of our success at both entities.
That's awesome. I love that perspective, and I love that background. Thanks for sharing that, Mac. So I'd love to dive in. So the topic of our workshop is, how do we prepare for the interview? When we're going into the interview, I think there's a lot of students that think to themselves, I'm really nervous, how I'm going to set myself apart. I would love to know, with just some early tips, what are some things that a student can do to start to prepare for that interview?
Well, the most important thing is to do the preparation. I meet so many people, Garrett, including people who are mid-career or even much farther along in their career, who treat the interview as a kind of discovery process, and they don't do the preparation. They walk into the room and they just wing it. And if you're going to wing it, you might as well not show up, I think. So some very simple steps after you get an interview: spend some time looking at the company website. You want to understand what the organization does, its mission, and you want to get a sense of what kind of challenges they face. Ultimately, you want to walk into the room with a mindset of what is in it for the employer, because that's what the manager is thinking about when talking to either a recent grad or anyone, no matter at what point they're in their career. What can this person do for me? So doing that kind of preparation, that basic homework, is a good first step. There's a number of other things that I know we're going to talk about, but you should plan on spending probably an hour or 2 hours getting ready for that conversation, because it is one of the most important business meetings you'll have that in the coming year. And why you wouldn't walk into another important business meeting without doing that kind of homework.
That makes a ton of sense, Mac. That's a really great point. So the prep is critical. And I love the point that you made that I thought really stood out to me, was that the manager, the person that's in the hiring role, is thinking to him or herself, what is this? What is in it for me? What am I going to get out of it? Yeah. Not the other way around. And so I think if you come in as a student applicant to the interview process and you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, how much money are you going to pay me? Or how much vacation days am I going to get? Or how is this going to serve me? If you come in, if I'm hearing you right, if you're coming in with that mentality, you're probably doing yourself a disservice. And so that kind of leads to another question, Mac. Are there any no-nos when it comes to the interview process that I really should try to avoid?
Well, the number one no-no for me, Garrett, is winging it. Don't walk into the room without preparation. And but some other ones that do come up, questions about vacation time, about salary, those are immediate turnoffs. There's a time and a place to talk about those, and that's when the offer is on the table, because that's when you're most desirable as a candidate. But if you want to, so many candidates tell me they want to stand out, they want to do something to distinguish themselves from the other applicants. Thinking about the employer's needs is one way to do it. And I think it's actually the most effective. Too many people make the mistake of focusing on their enthusiasm for the job, and you should share your excitement. Yeah, why else would you apply if you weren't excited? But that's not enough. If you want to stand out, you need to think about the needs of the employer.
That's a great point. I like that perspective, and I love what you said about waiting for the offer to come before you start negotiating that salary, because that's when you hold the power. It's like, okay, this person's already trying to negotiate the salary. We haven't even made an offer yet. Like, it's a huge turnoff. It already makes them think about the transaction. It makes them feel like you're only in it for a transactional nature, as opposed to in it for trying to make a difference, trying to help them achieve their professional and mission goals of the company.
Agreed. And you, again, you should negotiate. Too many people accept the first offer, and managers expect you to negotiate when a salary offer is made. And we can talk about how to do that effectively, but the timing here is really important. That particularly in the first round of interviews, there might be a phone screen, maybe an in-person meeting, followed by perhaps a separate appointment with members of the team. The purposes of these conversations are to get to know you and not only understand your skills, but to see if it's a good culture fit for the organization and for you as well. And then there comes a time in the process where you're the last person standing, and that's again when you're at your most desirable to the employer, and that's when you have your greatest leverage. I know we're going to talk about salary negotiation, but you gotta, and that requires preparation too. There's a way to do it effectively, and I'm looking forward to discussing that.
You know what? I think since we're already touching on the topic, let's just dive right into it. I think that's great. I mean, we're going to come back to the whole, how do we make the most out of the interview? We'll touch on those topics, but I think while we're already touching on it, we might as well dive right in. I mean, I think salary is something that's on the mind of a lot of students that are about to enter the workforce, and they're thinking to themselves, like, okay, well, should I just go for the highest paying job? Should I go for what is stated on the application board? Like, how should I go about making sure that I'm treated fairly in that salary negotiation process? And I think you made a great point that too many people don't negotiate their own salary. So what is an effective way to go about negotiating my salary, and how can I go about communicating that respectfully?
Well, the first step is when you're doing your goal setting and deciding what kind of position you want, you've got to think about the salary that you need. And you need to set a figure looking at your expenses and needs. And then as you look at what the market offers, you want to get a good understanding of what the jobs you're most interested in pay. And there are a number of ways you can do that. Three quick tips, Garrett. One is obviously paying attention to salary ranges in job postings as you look at positions that are publicly posted. Second, there's usually good salary research that's available online. Often professional associations in an occupation will publish annual salary surveys. Look at those, and they're often broken down by individual market. So knowing what those figures are going to help you make your own choices. They're also going to give you great data to cite when you're negotiating with a manager. And then the third thing you want to do is look for other published resources. Often career services centers at universities, sometimes at state employment offices will have salary data. There are a lot of good websites like Glassdoor that publish data as well, often for particular markets. That will help you figure out, okay, do the jobs I'm most interested in pay what I want? Then when you have an offer on the table, you're going to hear a figure and you're going to know what your range is. You can't make that up during the negotiation. You got to know that before you start those conversations. And if the figure that you hear is in your range, but perhaps at the lower end, that's when you go back to the data and you have a conversation about with the manager about the figure that you want. And when you want to break that down into parts, you don't want to say, I think a good way to react if the figure is not where you want to be is to say, well, I'm excited about this opportunity based on my research, and I'm happy to share the numbers I have. I was expecting the position would pay this, and let me tell you how I arrived at that figure. I looked at this association salary survey. I looked at this website. The data, as you see, is from our city, and it describes what a position like the one you're offering me pays. And there's going to be some back and forth, but if you make it about the data, not about fairness or need, you're going to be a lot more persuasive.
I love that. I mean, I think data, you can't argue with it. Data is data. It's not an opinion. It's not a feeling. It is what it is. It's facts. And so I love that when you go, I love that advice that you just gave about when you're going into a salary negotiation, come equipped with data to validate why you should have that salary. Now, I want to go back to a point that you made about doing your internal goal setting and identifying what does that number need to be. How do you come up with that number? How should I prepare myself mentally for where that number range should be? I guess, should I be greedy with how I envision my future, I guess, personal expenditures, or how should I go about projecting what I think my salary should be, just without doing any research on the actual average salary ranges for that type of role that I'm interested in pursuing?
Well, it starts with the occupation that you want the job you want, Garrett. So, if you want to make $150,000 and you want to be a social worker, that's not going to happen. So I think you need to focus first on the kind of work you want to do, and then you need to understand what that job pays in the market where you live and work. And that's where I would begin. And then it becomes a conversation when you're talking to a manager about what someone with your skills and experiences can expect to earn in that market, given what your research has shown you.
Love that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I wanted to dive into the interview itself.
Before we do that, can I just add two things, two common mistakes I see people make in salary negotiation. One is making it about need. Employers tell me sometimes they see candidates say, well, I'm sorry, I've got this student loan or this rent bill, so I've got to have this amount. That's not going to be persuasive. I get it. Those bills are real, and you've got a problem you need to solve, but that's not going to carry the day in a negotiation. And the other this happens less often, Garrett, but sometimes people talk about fairness. Well, it's not fair. You should pay me this. Make it about the data. Make it about the market. And that's going to help the manager who may have to go to a boss and say, well, we really want to hire her. As you know, we've only budgeted this amount, but she showed me salary surveys and data that in our market, this position pays this. So I need to do a little more than I expected.
I was going to ask, do you feel like companies are pretty educated about what the average salary range is for a role that they're hiring for? Or do you find that some companies kind of are disconnected from the real world?
It's hit or miss. Sometimes, particularly in smaller companies, hiring, they don't have HR departments and they don't have managers who are trained in how to do this research. So a figure may come out of the air. Sometimes employers use the hiring process to test what the market pays. And I don't think that's an effective way to do it. I think the better way is to do the kind of research that we talked about that candidates should do. And I don't think it's fair to candidates to do that, to go out and see what people might accept. So I think people who are good at hiring understand that before they post a position, they've got to understand what the market pays. And I think employers get much better results when they include salary ranges in job postings. There's data out there that shows they get many more responses when a salary range is included. It also saves time and energy because there's almost always a budget that an employer has in mind for a position. So why not tell the candidate that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and that's great insight. So as a student, you might be looking at what kind of role should I be pursuing. If it's got a salary out there, I mean, that I think is helpful. It gives you a context as to what you should be expecting or what to look for. So you're not blindsided by anything. You're not wasting your time if you really feel like this is way too out of the range of where I need to be. I want to take a quick question to ask the audience a question. I want to take a quick moment to ask the audience a question. That is, have you done the research on what the average salary range is for the role that you like to pursue for your career? If so, what is it? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. I'd love to see if you've already done the research. It's not good or bad. If it's high or low, doesn't necessarily matter. It's not a contest because, as Mac has already mentioned, it's all about the data. So what does the data indicate? What does it say about your role? Post it in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. So Mac, I'd love to dive into the interview process now. The first thing I'd love to ask is, how can I ensure that I'm being interviewed properly? How can I ensure that as a candidate that I'm being properly respected in the interview process? And how can I go about really making a positive impact and a positive impression in the interview?
Well, I think candidates should expect employers to be clear about the hiring process and share with them timelines and dates for when interviews will happen, how the decisions will be made, who will be making the decisions, and by when. Sometimes employers don't do that, and I think it happens sometimes it happens because hiring managers aren't trained in how to do hiring effectively, particularly at small organizations, Garrett. Hiring might be a rare event. It might happen once or twice a year. So the person who is managing the hiring process their job is something else entirely. So they're told to put up a posting, arrange interviews, and they've got other things to do. And so deadlines slip. People are uncertain about what to share with candidates. But I think what candidates should expect in a good hiring process, that clarity about the timeline. They should expect to hear back when they're told to, and they should be given the opportunity to communicate frequently and directly with people involved in the hiring process.
I love that. And when it comes to the actual interview itself, is there a methodology that you subscribe to when answering questions from an employer, from an interviewer? Is there a methodology that you subscribe to or follow when answering questions, or just a mode of thought?
Well, you can expect two kinds of questions in an interview. One will be about your technical skills, and that usually happens either in a phone interview or maybe in a first round of in-person interviews. And usually if you're in the room, there's no doubt you qualify, you've met the minimum requirements, and you've got the skills, but you might get some follow-up questions about what you've done about your qualifications. So you should be ready to answer those. The other that's very common are what are called behavioral questions. And these are questions designed to draw out examples of how you've dealt with the kind of challenges the employer faces. And you'll recognize a behavioral question, Garrett, because it will often begin with phrases like, tell me about a time, or give me an example of when. And the reason a manager asks a question like this is because she doesn't want to rely on promises. She wants actual results. And so our challenge before we go into the interview room is to get ready for those behavioral questions and have stories and examples that we can use to illustrate how we've dealt with those problems in the past.
That's awesome. I think the big golden nugget that you just said there is that a hiring manager is not looking for them to say, hey, trust me that I can do this. They're looking for results. They're looking for stories. They're looking for a track record of success. And even though as a student, you may have had limited experiences, maybe you've never had an internship before, they're not necessarily expecting you to come in with a full array of experiences, but whether that be on a volunteer experience that you've had, or a project that you worked on in school, or anything that where you were able to exemplify the skills that they're looking for, or the things that they're seeking, you can really showcase that. Would you say that's pretty good advice, Mac?
I would, and I find that university students and recent graduates have a lot of experience to draw on. They've almost always had volunteer positions. They've been involved in activities and teams and clubs. Often they've had summer jobs, one or two or more internships. So I think the experience is there. I think the challenge for a student or a new graduate is to get good at answering behavioral questions. And the way to do it is to get lists of these questions in advance and think about the kinds of examples you've got in your background that you can use to when you answer. And the other thing you got to do is practice. If you're getting ready to make a presentation, a speech, or you're going to be at a public event, of course you're going to practice ahead of time. Again, you might have 5, 6 job interviews in your first year after college. These are going to be some of the most important meetings you'll have this year. So why wouldn't you spend 2 or 3 hours researching the company, figuring out what their challenges are, thinking about the kinds of questions you're going to get, and practicing your answers, maybe with someone at the Career Center, maybe with a friend or a mentor. But that preparation is going to make you stand out. And again, I hear from students, what can I do to stand out? 50 people applied. I'm different. How can I show that? Preparation is a great way to do that.
I love that. That's a really, really great point. I know one question, and I know the answer is obviously going to come down to preparation, but one question I hear often, and I feel like is one of the more difficult questions to answer, and that is, what is your greatest weakness? Do you have any suggestions on how to answer the weakness question?
You will get that question occasionally. I think it's the key to answering it is to talk about a challenge you have and then how you're addressing it. So maybe your greatest weakness, for me, I might say, and this is true, Garrett, is procrastination or avoidance. And sometimes I put things off, particularly unpleasant tasks or things that I'm not quite sure how to do. And so I know it's going to take some extra effort. And if I were asked that question, I would describe that. And I'd say what I've found is the way to manage that is to write a clear list of things I need to do related to that task, breaking it down into parts, and then just getting started. And I found when I do that, that it takes about 1/10 of the time I thought it would, and I get it done a lot faster. So that's it's something I continue to manage, but I've got the tools now to do that, and I've had great success applying those tools.
That's awesome. And that seems to follow very consistently with, I read Dr. Robert Cialdini's book, Persuasion, and one of the things he talks about is that typically when using the terms but, yet, or however, it typically conveys something negatively. But when you're talking about your greatest weakness or something that you were, when you're being vulnerable or when you're talking about an area where you failed, if you follow it up with but, yet, or however, and then continue to talk about ways that you're improving it, the people who are hearing that are going to focus on the second part of what you just said, not the first part. So that's a really effective way of going about answering the weakness question, is following Mack's advice. Hey, I am a person who procrastinates, but what I've identified is that by putting it on my list, getting it done, it ends up taking a fraction of the time that it needed for me to get done. And I'm much better at managing that weakness.
Agreed. Ed, you acknowledge the problem, then you talk about what you're doing to fix it. And I've had a long career in political communications. I worked for a governor, and I worked for a mayoral candidate at City Hall, dealt with a lot of crisis communication situations. And the reason I bring it up is the principle there is the same. If you acknowledge what a problem is, and then you share your plan for fixing it, the conversation becomes about your plan. And it's the same in a job interview. If you're asked about a weakness, describe the weakness, but then talk about how you manage that and the steps you've taken, and the results you've produced. Then the conversation becomes about your approach and your results.
Let's practice that. Students that are watching this in the audience right now, I'd love if you could take a minute, write down your greatest weakness in the comments section, followed by but and how you're going about fixing that weakness or improving that or being a better person because of it. Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. I think this is a great way to prepare and practice for an interview setting, because if you think like, I'll think about it later. Well, later may come, and if you haven't prepared, if you procrastinated that, you may not be ready for the question when it comes in an interview setting. So take a moment right now, post in the comment section. I'd love to learn what is your greatest weakness, but how are you going about fixing that and turning it into a strength, or not as significant of a weakness, not as much of a hindrance. So yeah, I'd love to learn about that. Mac, I want to transition subjects a little bit. I want to transition into actually landing the interview itself. This is something that you are a master at, leveraging your network to get opportunities. What is your advice for students? I mean, they're all in mentor program. They're all in a mentoring relationship right now. What is your advice for a student that's looking for an internship? How can they be not so transactional, but effectively go about getting to where they want to be on a professional level?
I think there's an important principle every job seeker needs to recognize and then put into place, and it's this, Garrett. People hire people they know, or they hire people who are recommended to them by people they trust. And the reason that is so is because hiring is so expensive when you get it wrong. So managers are looking to reduce risk. And the way they reduce risk during hiring is they rely on relationships. And sometimes I tell people that, and job seekers will tell me, I'm doomed, I don't know anybody, or I'm just starting out, or I'm new to town. Here's the deal. We all have networks. We all have families, friendships. We're involved in clubs, activities, faith communities, university alumni associations. So we all have those relationships. We need to focus on how we can leverage them. And good networkers, they not only ask for help, but they also help others. And I think that's a second important principle to recognize, that networking is not about just asking, it's about giving. So I say all that because when you understand the power of a referral that comes through relationships, it's so important, and it can help you get that internship, the first, second, or fifth or 10th job. When I think about my own career, the best job I've had have come through referrals. And as people move along in their careers, they tell me the same. So if you're a student and you're wanting to land that job, first or second job, or an internship, you see it on the website, and you're preparing your application, what else can you do? Well, you should, if it's formally posted, you should definitely go ahead and do that. But before you send the application, if you have the time, step back and look at that organization and see if you know anybody who's on the inside. And the way you find that out is you look on LinkedIn, you look at your university database, you tell people in your communities that you are interested in the internship at this nonprofit, at that university, or this company, whatever it might be. And if you do those three things, look on LinkedIn, look at your university database, tell people, you'll be surprised what you discover. Sometimes people say, well, I don't have any LinkedIn contacts. Well, I would say, shame on you, because if you're a university student, you've got, you're taking classes every semester, your professors are well connected, they will connect with you on LinkedIn, so will the leaders of the clubs and activities you're involved in, the people that you've worked with in summer jobs, or the high school student teachers you knew. Those people all know people. So you need to spend some time connecting with the people who know you on LinkedIn. The other thing is the university database. I went to two great universities, Garrett. I went to the University of Iowa and I went to Harvard. At Harvard, they teach us to use the alumni database. Iowa, I think they're getting better at that. But the point I'm trying to make is this. I hear from people from Harvard all the time. I don't hear from Iowans that much. And that's a shame, because there are some very distinguished graduates that have come out of the University of Iowa. So whatever school you attended, if you're listening, believe me, there are people who know people who can introduce you to the folks who are working at that organization where you want to get that internship or the first job. So once you get those introductions, why does that make a difference if an internship has been publicly posted and there are 50 applications? There's somebody sitting at a desk and they've got to reduce that pile to 10 or 15. The number varies. There'll probably be some phone screens. So if somebody comes down the hall and says, I spoke with Mary, she's interested in this internship, she shared her resume, she made a good impression on me, that's not going to get you the job, but it can get your resume pulled out of the pile and into the interview list. The other benefit of getting a referral is when you have a conversation with someone inside that organization, they're going to be impressed that you found them and that you asked them for their insights. And that can translate into them going to HR and sharing that. But the other thing that happens, Garrett, in a conversation is you get insights into what the challenges are that the organization faces. And you can use that information in your application materials so that when you do hit send on your application for a publicly posted internship, your application is going to be much stronger than your competitors.
That's great insight. I love that. I love that, your perspective. So let's talk a little bit about the resume itself and the cover letter. I think a lot of students get stressed out about how can I set my cover letter apart? How can I set my resume apart? Yeah. What are your tips on resumes and cover letters?
You have to customize both. And sometimes when people hear that, they think, oh no, that's going to be 4 or 5 hours. I'm going to have to write the resume from scratch. You can customize your resume in 10 minutes or less by doing this, Garrett. Use an objective statement at the top, and it's usually 4 to 5 bullet points. And you want them to be unique for every application. Well, how can you make them unique? Print out the posting for the internship or the job, and look at what the job requires and the challenges that it's clear that the job addresses, and then draw from that to emphasize the skills and experiences in your objective statement that relate directly to that position. And the first time it might take you half an hour to do that, but if you do it, 5 or 10 times, you'll get good at it, and you really can customize your resume in 10 minutes or less doing that. With a cover letter, you again, don't use a generic cover letter. And I should also add, use a cover letter. It's remarkable. Employers tell me that they might see 30, even 40% of applications come in without cover letters. And that is, it's very rare for the people who do that to get interviews, because they're competing against people who are saying in a well-written cover letter, this is why I want to work for you, and this is what I can do for you. Sometimes I know many applicants will say, well, I just have to get out as many applications as I can. It's a numbers game. If I send out 1,000 or 500 applications, eventually something will hit. So I don't have time to write a cover letter. I would encourage you to step back and abandon that strategy altogether, because it's quality, not quantity, that matters. A job search is not a lottery, and your application shouldn't be a lottery ticket.
I call that the spray and pray method.
Yeah.
And I think there's a great story that it's an adage. I don't know where I heard this story, but I think it really exemplifies that point that you make. But I'll share the story right now. And the story goes like this. A guy was hired to cut down trees. On the first day, he cut down 7 trees. On the second day, he cut down 6 trees. On the third day, he cut down 5 trees. By the end of the week, he was only cutting down 1 tree a day. And he went to his boss and he said, hey, I don't know what's going on with me. I must be getting weaker. I'm cutting down less trees. I don't know what's going on with me. The boss says, well, when's the last time you took the time to sharpen your axe? He says, I don't have time to sharpen my axe. I got to be busy cutting down trees.
Yeah, that's a great story. And in the end, if you try to apply everywhere to be everything to all employers, it's not going to work, because employers want people who want their job and have the skills and understand and qualifications that are unique to that position.
That's great. No, that's a really good point. I think that really leads to a very poignant next question. It was one of my last questions on my list, but I think it's really relevant right now. And that is, for a student trying to determine exactly what he or she wants to do for his or her career, how can you go about identifying your priority list? How can you figure out what is something you actually want to do versus something that isn't so interesting to you? Or rather, how can I be confident enough to, maybe put it another way, how can I be confident enough to say, okay, I got a degree in this, and it says that stereotypically people with these degrees get these types of jobs, but I don't know if I like doing that type of work. I think I really like doing, this work over here, but I don't know if my degree goes with that. I guess the question is, how can I, one, figure out what I want to do, and then be confident enough to go in that direction, even if it's not like what the traditional path is for me?
Well, 2 steps I think come to mind, Garrett. One is invest time in goal setting. You work with someone at the Career Services office, or even a private career coach, or with a mentor, to get clear about the kinds of jobs you want. The second thing I would say is recognize that in the course of a 40-year career, you're not only going to have 10 or 15 jobs, you're probably going to have 3 or to 5 different careers entirely. So I would add a third point as we talk, which is your first job out of college may not be your dream job, and that's okay. But if you know where you want to go, you in the kind of position that excites you the most, then work back from that and figure out the internships or entry-level positions that are going to lead to that job. And it might take you 3 to 5 years to get there. So how do you do this kind of work? I mentioned with goal setting, working with the Career Services office. I'm also a big believer in informational interviews. So if you know if you come up with a list of 3 different jobs that interest you, again, locate your LinkedIn network, check your university database, find 2 or 3 people who are doing those positions, or working in those positions rather, and ask them about their typical days, how they got there, what kinds of entry-level positions lead to those occupations, what they like about their job, what they don't like. You have 3 or 4 conversations about a particular job. You'll figure out pretty quick whether that's something that excites you or not. Pay attention to your energy. In my case, when I came to Oregon after graduate school many decades ago, there were three kinds of jobs that interested me: working in communications at a university, working as a communications director or campaign manager for a statewide campaign, or working for an elected official, a governor or a mayor. So I actually identified people who had had those jobs or who hired people for those jobs. And I didn't ask them for a position. I just asked for 20 to 30 minutes of their time to find out about those jobs, how they got them, and who might be hiring. And I figured out pretty fast I didn't want to work at a university. And I was most excited about working for an elected official in a government agency. And that's the job I got. But I didn't wait for a position to pop up on a website, or in those days, it was actually newspaper ads. I invested time in figuring out if it was something I wanted and what it would take to get there.
And should I feel ashamed of myself if my interests change?
Absolutely not. We all have multiple interests. Everybody does. And so when you think about your career, think that if you've got 3-5 different sets of interests, and that's probably going to lead to 3 to 5 distinct jobs, you're going to have those over the course of 35, 40 years in the workplace, those different jobs, and they're going to be very different. So the first 7 years of my career, I worked for human rights organizations involved in U.S. Latin American policy. And then I was working in state government and politics in Oregon and Massachusetts. And then for the last 15 years, I've been running my own public relations company. Those are very different occupations, but they were all things that interested me. I can see when I left the University of Iowa as an undergraduate.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Mac. So I want to ask the students in the audience one final really quick question. That is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? We talk about goal setting. Where is your 5-year dream destination? And then what is the first step that you want to take right after college towards working towards getting there? Because I think, as Mac alluded to in what he said, was that it may not be the dream job right off the bat, but it's working towards the outcome of where you want to be. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that. I'd love for you to begin that goal setting process and start laying out what is that first step towards getting to where that dream job is. So Mac, one final question I wanted to ask you, and actually 2 final questions I want to ask you. One of them is, the first one is, let's say I get the offer. And I've got the offer, but I'm waiting to hear back from maybe another company. What is proper etiquette? Is it really bad if I get an offer accepted and then pull back and actually accept another offer? What are the consequences for my actions? I think this is a really important point for students to learn from someone as experienced as yourself on this topic. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you have an offer from one company and you're a candidate for a position at another company, I think you have to ask yourself, which position interests you the most. If you're most excited about the opportunity with a company that hasn't made an offer yet, it's appropriate to contact that employer and say, want to give you a heads up. I have an offer on the table, and I got this period of time to make a decision. I'm not trying to pressure you, but I want to check in on your process and see where I might stand, because I remain interested in continuing our conversation about the possibility of working together. So that's pretty low key. It's not like, hey, somebody else wants me, so if you want to hire me, you better get back to me right away. And if the employer wants you that hasn't made an offer yet, they may speed up their process, and they may say, well, thanks for letting us know, and we still need to interview X number of candidates, or we don't expect our process to end for a week or two, and so it's up to you whether you want to accept that offer or not. And then you've got a choice to make. I think the worst thing you could do, Garrett, is accept the offer from the first company, and then maybe a month later you hear from the second company and they make you an offer. I doubt that they would do that if you have moved to the first company. But if you did, I don't think it would create a good impression with your new employer if you left another one several weeks later. In fact, I think it would be a very negative thing. So
well, I think for a lot of college students, this is something that they go through quite often because they're still waiting for May to happen. They're still waiting for graduation to occur. They may get a job offer to start in May or June or July, all the way in October. Like they may get this offer 6-7 months in advance. And so this is a very normal thing that I feel like happens quite frequently for students is they'll get an offer and then a month later hear another offer. So I think the point that you're making, I guess, what are the ramifications for doing something like that?
Well, I think if you accept an offer in October and you get another one in April that you think is better, and you say no to the first offer after you've accepted it, I think that creates a bad impression with the employer, and so that you're burning a bridge.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think that's great insight, Mac. So the last question I have is, how can our audience find you? Mac, by the way, thank you so much for being here. I thought your advice, your insight was great. Students, thank you so much for being so active and participant in this workshop. Mac, how can our audience find you? How can they connect with you? Are there any new books, podcasts, any new things that you're working on that our students can get involved with and interact with you?
On our website, you can find lots of free resources about job hunting by visiting maxlist.org/learn. Every week we publish 2 or 3 articles about job hunting skills, as well as free guides. There are online courses that are also there, as well as a weekly podcast that I host, Find Your Dream Job. And every week I talk to a different career expert about the nuts and bolts of job hunting. And so I would encourage people to go there. We also have a job board for listeners who might be in the Pacific Northwest with positions in Oregon and Washington. I recognize you have a national audience, but the content that we offer about job hunting skills applies anywhere.
That's awesome. Well, Mac, thank you so much for being here. This was awesome. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your night. I look forward to seeing you all at our next workshop. Good night.
Thank you.